So, Phil, we've been stuck in our houses for about a year now.
About exactly a year by my reckoning.
Yeah, we are recording this approximately 1 year after all of the lockdowns started. And I don't know about you, but I've gotten to the point where there's just not as many things to do in my house anymore as there were at the beginning of the pandemic.
You're right.
And that's why I've sent you this link to an artist, Jan Eriksson. And you can find him at janhakon.com. Jan Eriksson is this amazing artist that I think you posted a little bit starting at the beginning of the pandemic. He's sort of a performance artist and a DIY creator artist.
He's a Twitter artist for sure.
You say Twitter artist, but I say Instagram artist because I'm younger and hipper. Anyway, enough of our Snapchatting about this. Let's talk about what this artist does.
He precariously sets up knives about his body in order to pop balloons.
But he really likes to work in a DIY sort of fashion where he'll make something out of simple available materials like steak knives and 1x4 that he's screwed together, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or he'll work with a bunch of pasta and a board that he's put on his forehead. And what he'll do is he'll make this line of pasta on a wall that he's installed on a wall, and then he'll take a board attached to his head and run that board through it until he breaks all the pasta.
Mm-hmm.
This sounds really silly, and it is funny when you watch him do it, right?
It's simultaneously absurdism and also like the satisfaction of watching a balloon pop or pasta break. It's got that visceral, feeling to it.
Right. I've seen one of his series called Fight Song, and it's literally he's created all of these homemade exercise devices like a homemade treadmill, but on the front of the treadmill is a bunch of flour that's hanging suspended. And as you run on the treadmill shakes and the flour slowly sifts its way all over your face.
Yeah,
right?
Right.
So the idea here is he's working in a space where he tortures himself to do the things his machines are designed to do. Or he sits right on the very edge of being in a position of danger just because he wants to do something that looks pretty stupid.
Yeah, absurd danger. That's what it is. It's Jackass times 2.
Except he's not hurting anyone else. He's only hurting himself.
Yeah, but it's coming from the same place, right?
Right. Well, and he actually has once or twice hurt himself to the point where he had to go to the hospital because a steak knife cut him so badly.
Right. Yeah.
And this is funny because the steak knives are always aimed at balloons, and he'll literally tape a steak knife to his forehead and punch a bunch of balloons in the wall with it. But I wanted to bring this guy up, not just because his art is so absurd, but I wanted to ask you, Phil, over the course of the pandemic, or just in general in your life, what weird destructive habits do you have that are kind of funny when you step back and think about them?
Well, I don't know if I have any funny ones, but buddy, if you want to talk about destructive habits...
I didn't realize we were exposing your compulsive Funko Pop binges on the podcast.
I have bought more than one. Would that be performative enough? Could I do destructive Funko Pop purchasing and become a social media superstar on it? Be like, here's my bank account statement. You'll notice I have $0 in it, but here I am going to purchase this Macaulay Culkin Funko Pop.
I think that you could probably pull it off if you had a live Twitch stream and you brought your wife in and said, hey, Jess, come watch this. And she'd be like, no, you're not doing it again, are you? And you'd be like, yes. And you'd hover your mouse over the buy button. She'd be like, don't click that, please. And you'd click buy. And she's like, that was $50. Why did you do that? I think you need the spouse reaction so people can see the damage that's being done to your marriage.
Spouse reaction videos to stupid purchases is a genre that remains untapped. We can start off, Mets. You buy a big blanket and get Amy's reaction.
My wife would cuddle up under it instantaneously and say, you deal with the consequences. See, I don't want to get into your market. You have that spousal shame video thing kind of locked down, I think, if you pursue that idea. I think for me, we could film a series of videos where my daughter walks up to me and says, I'd like to start a YouTube channel, Daddy. And I just try to maintain composure at how destroyed her life has become by the internet. Right. I hate to say that she does that on a regular basis. She'll come up to me and say, Dad, we need to make a YouTube channel where we review food.
Yep. Alex does the same thing. He dreams of being a YouTuber.
One time she was playing by herself in another room and she started narrating something and actually said, "Please be sure to like and subscribe." And my wife and I looked at each other and were like, uh-oh.
This is the same horror our great-grandparents felt when their children were like, "It's howdy doody time." I said, oh, God.
Why are we letting them watch that box that saps their brains? I'd be so happy if she was just pretending to be a TV show character. She hasn't started trying to make her own 5-minute crafts yet, so I suppose there's still hope there. Anyway, speaking of a couple of guys who are ready to take advantage of non-fungible tokens, welcome to Alzabo Soup, where we literally become our favorite authors by devouring portions of their brains. I'm Metz.
I'm Phil, and it's called Alzabo Coin.
This is a digitally signed special episode that's only available to you if you download it from our website where anyone can download it.
Congratulations, by listening to this, you have agreed to pay us $6.7 billion. Today we are covering the Binti trilogy by Nnedi Okorafor.
And boy, do we have a lot of ground to cover with it.
Yeah, but before we start, Metz, do we have a new patron this week?
Yes, we do. Today's thanks goes out to a patron that only identified themselves as Huggy Bear.
Speaking of growing up to become a TV show.
Like I'm sure you did, Phil, I realized right away that Huggy Bear was not this person's real name, and that they were simply trying to promote their business, which is the Belgian restaurant, the Huggies Burger Bar.
I've never heard of this place.
That's because it's in Belgium.
Is Belgium real?
That sounds like a mystery for Hercule Poirot.
I was going to say Agatha Christie invented it, right?
So I looked at the website of Huggies Burger Bar, and they actually have quite a few burgers on it, but they specifically advertise themselves as American-style burgers.
Oh, okay. So this is a Belgian Red Robin.
Something along those lines. And I just wanted to read to you a couple of the burgers that they have here that they identify as American. Of course, you've got the standard sort of ideas like the truffle cheeseburger and the big cheesy cheeseburger. Here is what they call the Colonel Burger. Pure beef patty, Monterey Jack, bacon, onion rings, fried egg, homemade pepper sauce, raquette, and red onions.
I mean, that sounds all right.
It doesn't sound too bad, but what's interesting to me is it's the Colonel's Burger, but there's no fried chicken on it,
yeah,
right?
There's only 6 essential herbs and spices.
Then we have the Davy Crockett Burger. This sounds like a wholesome Americana sort of thing, right? This is a lamb patty with goat cheese, homemade garlic and rosemary sauce, and tomato.
That sounds delicious.
It actually sounds good, but does it remind you of Davy Crockett?
No, it doesn't have any raccoon in it.
And they didn't kill a bear when it was only 3. But here's the pièce de résistance, the one that I feel like truly identifies it as American, the Nachos Burger, which consists of a pure beef patty, cheddar, nachos, homemade cheddar sauce, and homemade sweet salsa. And I will say, when they say nachos, the chips on this burger look like they're Doritos.
Yeah, that they nailed it. That's exactly the kind of crappy food that America is quickly becoming known for. Anything that's stupid and memeable, that's America cuisine for you. So I think it took them a few tries, but Huggies, you definitely got it in the end. Congratulations.
And thank you very much, Huggy Bear, for supporting us on this trip down what other people think of America.
Yeah, right. Before we return to Long Sun and the science fiction escapades there, we figured we'd take a look at some other contemporary sci-fi. And we were really interested to expand our reach a little bit. And we wanted to find an author who has become kind of known for writing from a different perspective, writing sci-fi in a different vein. So we decided to read through the Binti trilogy. This is actually a trilogy of 3 novellas, and we will be speaking about the entirety of the story that they tell. So if you haven't read these yet and are interested, definitely go check them out. They can be obtained in a single volume called the Binti trilogy, and they are pretty quick reads.
So today we'll be covering Binti, Binti Home, and Binti the Night Masquerade, all written by Nnedi Okorafor. These books were written in 2016, 2017, and 2018, 1 year for each novella. Okorafor is a Niger American writer, and that is the term that she uses to refer to herself. She was born in 1974 in the US to Igbo Nigerian parents who were students who had come from Nigeria to study abroad in the United States. Her parents came over, but then were unable to leave the US due to a civil war in Nigeria. And so Okorafor ended up growing up here and definitely considers her heritage as both African and American to be something that informs her work very heavily.
Yeah, she has been called part of the current Afrofuturism movement of Black authors writing in genre, but she has said that she conceives her writing more as African futurism, and the specific difference between the two is that African futurism is interested primarily in the experience of people who live in Africa or come from Africa, as opposed to the Black experience in America or Europe or what have you.
And that is something, again, that Okorafor distinguishes herself. She's very happy to talk about her writing and why she has made the decisions that she's made in her books. This is very much at the forefront of what she's attempting to explore in her fiction. Okorafor lived in Illinois for most of her youth. She was a high-profile tennis and track athlete in high school. She was also diagnosed with scoliosis in her teenage years, and a medical complication from spinal fusion surgery to relieve her scoliosis actually left her paralyzed from the waist down. She later regained the ability to walk. It took, I think, a year or two, but at that point, she was no longer able to pursue an athletic career. And one of the things she did to cope and recover from this was she started making notes in the margins of science fiction books that she was reading and started writing her own science fiction stories. She took her interest in language and changed her career. Originally, she was interested in entomology to get a bachelor's degree at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, a master's in journalism from Michigan State, and her PhD in English from the University of Illinois in Chicago. Phil, like you said, she likes to write in the style of African futurism, and she writes all sorts of different works in that style. She's written YA and adult fiction, comic books, plays, and she's done film work as well. Some of her notable books, other than Binti, are her first adult novel, Who Fears Death, which was a winner of the World Fantasy Award and the Nebula Award in 2011 and 2012, and the Marvel Black Panther comics. She has written not only for the Black Panther line itself, but also wrote a standalone title for Shuri, who is the main character T'Challa's sister, and she becomes the Black Panther herself at times within the Marvel Universe.
Mm-hmm.
So this is somebody who is very comfortable writing in genre fiction, but gives us a very different outlook on that genre fiction than somebody like Gene Wolfe would.
Right.
Among other things, she is totally fine throwing in an alien race or a completely different culture and describing them immediately and upfront to you, right? Where Wolfe is the kind of writer who would prefer that we discover that an alien race exists and thinks differently from humans based on observing their behaviors, Okorafor really wants to define and show us who that different species is and how they might feel or behave as they're introduced within the story.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not to say that these characters don't have an interiority, but they have a different kind of interiority than Wolfe has with some of his major characters.
Mm-hmm. And these books, I think, are classified as YA, and so they are concerned with a teenage perspective or a young adult perspective, and they are written very much within that realm, that publishing realm. But in a lot of ways, too, these novellas are bonkers crazy, Mets, and deal with largely the same concerns as something like Book of the New Sun. Like,
Right.
what if you had a savior character who had to go into space and save everyone, right?
They also have a strong fixation on the idea of identity. And if we follow Binti through these three novellas, we discover her identity constantly changes and updates in relationship to who she meets, the cultures she experiences, and the interactions she has with those cultures.
Right. Yeah.
Another characteristic of Okorafor's work is that because she's interested in the African experience and writing about Africans in a genre setting, is that she often wants to reference actual tribal groups or countries or geographic areas within Africa in her work. An obvious example of that is that Binti is a Himba girl, and Himba is a very specific indigenous people who live in now what is northern Namibia and southern Angola in Africa. They're a semi-nomadic tribe. They tend to move as water supplies change, although they do also have homesteads that they try to stay at for long periods of time. But they have this distinguishing feature, which is they use ojitsa, which is a combination of butterfat and clay that they use to cover their bodies as protection from the heat and also as an alternative to clothing. Himba women will also put this ojitsa in their hair in order to cover their hair and protect it from the elements, but also as a fashion and dress accessory within their culture.
Yep.
So these elements are things that are very important in Binti, but it is also important that the Himba of Binti's world are not exactly the same as the Himba tribe that I have just described.
Yeah.
In Okorafor's writing, she will take these elements of the Himba tribe and incorporate them into a reimagining or a mashup of what she wants the Himba to represent in her own writing. And she will look at it almost in an alternate history or a 1,000 years later sort of mindset when she's looking at these cultural groups.
Right. She pulls off the same trick here that Wolf does. She sets the story in a future so remote that nothing matters.
Right. And because of that, we're able to jump off into wild lands of fantasy. Okorafor is also totally happy letting her imagination run wild and create alien species which are very much non-human. We don't have a Star Trek universe for her where everyone basically looks like a human being and it's a question of what prosthetic makeup the actor is wearing. Instead, she'll describe alien races that are somewhat like insects or that are just a ball of fur with legs, or a type of transportation that involves a pitcher plant spilling out a certain kind of liquid on a track that allows a slug to move back and forth, or even the ships in Binti, which are living beings themselves that house and transport other living beings across the stars.
Yep.
So all of this is to say that we're in a very high fantasy sort of science fiction setting.
So the setup here is that Binti is a girl from this Himba tribe, and her father is someone called a master harmonizer, and his business is that he creates astrolabes, which are combination cell phones, universal transformers, PDAs, computers, and everything you need.
Right. It is the technological device that you carry with you at all times.
Yeah, but we are so far in the future of this story that it's basically magic. Binti has this ability to what is called treeing, where she can enter into a meditative state and do math so well that you can actually manipulate a current of energy. And sometimes this is described as literal electricity, and sometimes it's almost metaphorical, but it's mathematical equations being manipulated in some sense. And this is how astrolabes are created. They're kind of crafted in a craftsman's workshop kind of sense, where a harmonizer is manipulating currents to write circuitry almost. And Binti has inherited a genius for this ability from her father. And the story opens with her being invited to the galactic source of knowledge, a place called Umza University, a planet-sized college.
Now, importantly, we've just talked about treeing and the magic. The reason we're describing it that way is Okorafor never tries to go into more detail than what we just have about that technology. The important thing is Binti can do things that we as normal humans cannot do, and that many of the other people around her cannot do.
Right.
This is important to her tribe because she is slated to become the next master harmonizer for her tribe in the Himba people. However, like Phil says, she's been given the opportunity to go to this intergalactic university. And so she sneaks away from that tribe at the very beginning of the first novella. She goes to a spaceport where she encounters the first other big ethnic group that will be a part of this series. They're called the Kush. They are an Arabic race, but not necessarily a specific one, just one that Okorafor has created in this case. They appear to be a majority population, whereas the Himba are a minority. The Kush tend to look down upon and disdain the Himba and tolerate but not necessarily treat them well.
Yep. So the setup of this story is we do have this person who represents a traditional people, so much so that she wears this ojitsa at all times. She considers herself naked if she hasn't rubbed this clay all over her body. And to her, it represents her home, but it also smells in a way that can bring her peace of mind. And it is also her style and all this stuff. And even though other characters call her dirty or like literally wearing mud, she still recognizes it as this essential core of her identity. So the book starts already with this conflict of traditional paths versus like the opportunity to study abroad. But then things get complicated because on the journey to the university on the ship,
which again is a living being that has been used as a spaceship, and it is conscious and willing to be this spaceship.
And during the voyage, it is invaded by an alien race called the Meduse, which are essentially giant jellyfish, floating jellyfish.
In fact, Okorafor says that the whole series was inspired by a blue jellyfish that she saw floating in a lake.
These jellyfish have an ancient religious war with the Kush people, and so they slaughter all the other candidates on the ship, and only Binti survives. It's this horrible massacre. And they're doing this specifically because human Kush scientists have taken the chief Medusa's stinger, his dangerous weapon of war, and displayed it at a university. They're using this pretext to restart this religious war.
The reason that Benti survives all of this is because she has an object that she calls an Idan. That Idan is a piece of alien technology she doesn't understand. But in the chaos of the battle, as the Medusa are attacking, she grabs it and instinctively manages to tree or channel into it enough energy for it to protect her somehow from the Medusa. It injures those Medusa, and also, she discovers, enables her to communicate with them directly, even though she cannot speak their language.
Yeah.
The Medusa don't quite know what to do with her, so they essentially lock her in her quarters and start having negotiations with her through the wall so that she doesn't fight back against them.
Yeah, so eventually she is able to befriend one of these Medusa, one of them named Akwu, and forms an alliance or a truce between them long enough that she is able to kind of act as the hero and be the go-between or the negotiator between the Medusa and the Kush in order to satisfy it won't be a war anymore. And that's kind of the action of the first of the novellas.
By the end of the first novella, the Kush and the Medusa have agreed to another truce that was brokered by Binti on the grounds of Umza University. She prevents this giant war from happening again.
Yeah, but one of the conditions of this truce is that she has to succumb to the chief and kind of sacrifice her body. And she is stabbed with their stingers, these deadly swords, in a way that injects her body with Medusa DNA. And her hair, which has been braided and covered with this ojitsa, is in a style she calls okwokwo. And here they are transformed to look like these translucent blue Medusa tentacles, jellyfish tentacles. So her body literally changes in this process, and she is now half human, half Medusa. It's a very odd term, and we kind of have to understand that the science, I guess, is a bit fudgeable so far in the future that this kind of thing can happen. And that's where the first novella ends. I think it's pretty satisfying and an interesting read and brings up a lot of interesting ideas about identity and tradition and all that fun stuff. But really, it serves just as the basis for where this story is going to go.
Right. We've gotten a couple of really key themes here that'll remain present throughout the rest of the novel. The first one, as you mentioned, is identity. We have a girl, she first goes into the Kush, a foreign culture on Earth. then begins to interact with a completely alien culture, that of the Medusa. She finds a way to mesh with the Medusa through communication that eventually becomes a physical transformation as well, and ends the story in what is portrayed as a cosmopolitan utopia, the UMSA University, where scholars from all species are together learning as one.
Yeah.
Right. The second major theme that we get here is the impact of trauma on a person's life.
Yeah.
Because Binti has this tragic moment, hugely traumatic, where she watches all of the humans around her die during the invasion of the Medusa on this ship. Specifically, the image of the boy that she liked having a Medusa stinger burst out from his chest, as if he's been stabbed from behind, is an image that will haunt Binti for the remainder of the series.
Mm-hmm.
The other major trauma that happens to Binti is the trauma where the Medusa chief stabs her. It's not explained to her what might happen to her when this stinger is injected into her. She's only told that if she wants to represent the Medusa, she must prove that she can be trusted by dropping the security of her Idan around them.
Mm-hmm.
So this assault leads to a transformation of her physical form that Binti never consented to. I don't know that we want to go down the road of calling it a sexual assault, but it is certainly a profound physical transformation that Binti has to live with, whether or not she likes it, for the rest of the series.
Yep.
And it becomes a constant struggle of her navigating the tension between her human self and what she begins to call her Medusa self or Medusa instincts.
Yeah. So at the end of the first book, she is recognized as an intergalactic hero, someone who is capital S special, and she's been given special permissions at USMA University to study her Adon or go where she needs to go or whatever she needs to do. She's recognized as a significant, important person on a galactic level.
And she has also negotiated for the Medusa she is closest with, Okwu, to become the first Medusa student at UMSA University, signaling that the galaxy is welcoming that culture into the fold as well.
Right. When we come into the second novella, it's been a year, and she is suffering not only from homesickness, but also PTSD. And she can't even ride the rail that goes between the different cities of the university because the smell of the pitcher plant's slime reminds her of blood.
As well, even though UMSA was presented as this large cosmopolitan utopia, Binti has experienced some level of discrimination and people either not understanding her culture or simply viewing her as not good enough. And that's something that she's been dealing with internally as well.
Mm-hmm. And then she's also been experiencing these flashes of anger, which are very unusual for her. She conceives of herself and her role as a harmonizer to be someone who's always calm and collected, and feeling these intense emotions of anger makes her feel that she is in some way damaged or has become unclean by her experiences. So she decides she's going to return to Earth, return to her village, and go on the traditional pilgrimage that all women of her tribe do before they are officially recognized as women and can enter into a marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And we are granted this really interesting scenario when she returns home and she is violently accused by her family of betraying their traditions, betraying her responsibilities to her family, and really forcing into the conflict, what feels like a really realistic conflict for a lot of people of how do I stay true to my traditions and to my culture while also coming out and joining a greater community, right?
That's not the only violence that happens, too, because Binti has arranged for Okwu to come visit Earth, the first Medusa to visit Earth since the peace that was brokered between the Kush and the Medusa. And the Kush, frankly, are not very happy about it. There's an assassination attempt almost immediately as Binti and Okwu step off their ship and try to travel to Binti's home. Mm-hmm. Binti's family is doing their best to be good hosts as well. They've set up a special tent that is supposed to be comfortable for Okwu to live in. But as you said, they're internally dealing with the same conflict. They're extremely proud of Binti for her stature and her heroism and her importance in the galaxy, but they also recognize that she has created huge problems for them at home. For example, her father had slated her to be the next master harmonizer for their tribe, and now they no longer have that. So he's forced to work longer and see if there's anyone who's even able to fill that role for them in the future.
Mm-hmm. So it's I think, a really interesting conflict that the book goes to and then almost completely abandons. Because all of a sudden, as Binti is in her room trying to deal with the emotions of all these revelations, she looks out the window and she sees what is called the Night Masquerade. This is a mythological figure in this tribe's culture that only appears to people right before a very dramatic or significant, important moment that they will be central to, but also only appears to males as well. And she is shocked to see it. And just as this happens, all of a sudden a new faction gets swept into the scene where these desert people show up at their house. And the desert people are people who live out in the wilds of the desert. They say, Binti, you have to come with us. And her father agrees, and she's led off onto this journey into the desert where she discovers she also shares a heritage of this tribe of people who have a secret and unique telepathic technology that was granted to them when ancient aliens landed and taught their ancestors about it.
If you're listening to this right now and saying, this is off the charts, I had no idea something like this would happen in this story, it's not the first time, and it actually integrates much better than the way that we're describing it right here. But it's another element of culture clash, right? The desert people actually have a name for themselves that Binti doesn't know. They are the Enyi Zenaria. And the Zenaria is the name of this technology that they all have access to that is genetically coded into them. It turns out that Binti's father is a member of the Enyi Zenaria, and that one of the people who's come to see her is her grandmother. The father broke away from the tribe to become the master harmonizer and join the Himba people. And in some ways, he's looked down upon in the Himba culture because of his own status as a cross-cultural person.
Yeah.
But he still maintains strong connection to the tribe of the Enyi Zenaria, in part because he can communicate with them through this special method that Binti's never heard of.
Yeah. So now not only has she resolved her conflict as being part human, part Meduse, part intergalactic citizen, part hero, but also part of her tribe, which has all this meaningful and significant cultural signifiers. Now, too, she is also trying to reconcile the fact that she's also related to this group of people that she frankly admits to seeing only as savages before. And on top of it, it turns out to be that they're also secret wizards, and she is the ability to do this too. This telepathic communication is unlocked for her. And so she becomes even more complex and transformed than she was already.
So as the Enyi Zenaria turn on this ability in her, she's flooded with a completely new skill that she has to learn how to use. She starts to be able to communicate with other people in this secondary telepathic language and tries to reach out to her father. As she does, she finds out that her family has been attacked, that the Kush have come to take revenge on Okwu, who stayed back at her tribal city, right?
Yeah.
And in the process of this happening, her family is now at risk, and the novella ends on a cliffhanger of her needing desperately to return back to that home in order to save them.
Yeah, so the first novella, just Binti itself, I think works pretty darn well as a short story, as a short novella. It's breezy, it's quick, it's full of interesting ideas, very, very strange conception of a future sci-fi setting. I think it works really, really well. And then the second novella is very entertaining, I think, but it does seem slight to me in that it is really just setting the ground for the third one, which is the longest one, and picks up immediately where the second one ends.
But we can see in there the continuing conflicts of identity, of Binti learning to understand who she is and realizing that there's more to her than she ever allowed herself to understand.
Yeah.
This fits in really well with a YA theme of the maturation of the main character as well, right? Because we all discover new things about ourselves as we age and mature, or at least I hope we do.
Yeah. We pick up right into the third novella, Binti Night Masquerade, where she is returned to her home to find it completely burned down by the Kush, and she thinks her entire family is dead. What's crazy about this, Mets, is like just a couple days before they were arguing about family squabbles about like who was going to take over the shop, right?
Mhm.
And now they're all massacred.
Well, and that's part of the shock that I'm sure Okorafor wants us to feel as we get in there. Binti is realizing how much her family does actually mean to her despite the conflicts that they have, and that there is something deeper that connects her to this group of people that's valuable, and that she loves them and still wants the best for them despite their disagreements, right?
Yeah.
But she's come back. She's been trying to talk to Okwu, who she has some level of psychic connection with already, but hasn't been able to raise him until she returns and remembers to go check the lake that she brought him to when they first came out there. At the lake, she finds not only Okwu, but also other Meduse who have arrived. They are responding to the attack by the Kush, and they are preparing their own war. They will attempt to fight back and slaughter the Kush as a result of what they attempted to do to Okwu.
Yeah.
Binti realizes that this is not going to be a good thing, and also really isn't interested in the peace that she brokered falling apart again. So she goes back to her own tribe, the Himba, and speaks with the tribal elders there to say, we need to use what she calls the Himba deep culture, which we are to understand is some sort of additional primal magic that the Himba have access to that will allow them to broker a final and lasting peace between the Kush and the Meduse. The elders are reluctant at first, including the most recent member of the tribal councilor, one of Binti's childhood friends, Dele, who is a new member of the organization and can't really speak for them all. They ultimately agree to help Binti and to broker this peace, but when it comes to the final showdown between the Kush and the Meduse, representatives from the Kush and the Meduse show up to talk to Binti, but nobody from the Himba tribe is there. Instead, Binti is forced herself to call upon the deep culture of the Himba, and in a massive display of her channeling, treeing magic, manages to get all of these groups to talk to one another and in awe, essentially, agree to stop all of the fighting. It seems like everything is successful, but literally as Binti turns to walk away from the negotiations, she is shot in the back by a betrayer from the Kush and dies.
Yeah, she dies. She straight up dies, but she's resurrected. And let's talk about a savior of humanity who finds their divinity by dying and resurrecting in outer space. Have we read?
You've already done a lot of episodes on Severian.
Why is every book we read the same one?
It's certainly not as simple as everything we've just described. Yeah. But what does happen is after Binti dies, her family and her friends discover this and mourn her, including Winnie, who is a character from the Enyi Zinaria, who is grown close to Binti over this time and appears to have some romantic relationship with her.
Yeah.
Okwu and Winnie agree to take Binti to the Rings of Saturn. The reason that they're going there is because Binti has started to understand that her Idan is related to the Rings of Saturn somehow, and had spoken about that briefly before she died.
Right. This is where the book starts to get crazy. As if it hadn't at all up to this point. So the spaceship that they've traveled on back and forth between Uzma University was called the Third Fish, and it's described as almost being a shrimp-like creature. And you actually enter into its body to ride on it. It's been genetically modified to survive in space and also act as a transportation. And it breathes in space by having these giant rooms that are filled with oxygen-generating plants. During the events of this novella, that ship has given birth to a new ship called New Fish, and that's what they use to travel to Saturn's rings. And as they're traveling, they place Binti's body in one of these breathing rooms, and magically, because the ship is new and her connection to it through her Adam, it is able to fill her body with particles or microbes, part of itself, and essentially not only resurrect her, but like intrinsically combine itself with her in such a way that she can no longer be too far away from this fish-shaped living spaceship.
So, if we're talking about symbiosis here, right? Binti not only has some sort of symbiotic relationship with the Medusa through the genetic relationship they created with her, she now is only alive because of a second symbiotic relationship with a completely different alien species.
Mhm.
And she is combined into all of these things, comes back to life, much to the shock and delight of both Okwu and Mwini, who've accompanied the ship, and discovers the true purpose of her Idan, which was some parents asking if Umza University was going to be a good enough place to send their kids.
Yeah, so what's revealed is that these ancient aliens who visited the desert people and gave them the technology of telepathic texting also left this ancient artifact, this Adam, that Binti finds in the desert, and it seems almost like she was destined to come across it. And it is through this device that she not only been protected from the Medusa during that initial attack, but has also been given these messages of come find us up in Saturn. When she arrives there, and because she can do this because she is now also part spaceship, she communicates with a different alien race who said, we've used this technology to communicate with you because we want the opinion of someone who's like us. We can only really trust the opinion of someone who has gone through transformations and become more than they initially were. We want to know, is Uzma University a good school? And when Binti says, yeah, it's great, I love my professors, they say, okay, thanks, we're going to enroll now. The end.
No, it's completely anticlimactic, and we haven't talked about it a lot, but this Idan is the constant burning question of Binti throughout the novellas, right? It's
Right.
she brings it to Umza because she doesn't know what it is in the first place. And then as soon as it starts to change her life, it becomes a central thing, a major research project for her at the university, and something that she carries with her through this entire journey. It turns out just to be a recommendation letter.
Right. So, Mets, there's something going on here. I've seen this. So I did some research after I read the book, and the general opinion of the whole Binti trilogy seems to be like fascinating ideas, really interesting perspective, and an important voice, really good conceptually out there sci-fi, but one that kind of fails to stick the landing. It gets too weird too fast, and then people are left with this unresolved feeling. But this has to be intentional, right? It's such a shaggy dog story. Binti literally transforms 4 times. She is called by the Uzma University people completely unique. There is not a single other entity in the entire galaxy that is like her, who is
You could just see Gene Wolfe reading this up in heaven going, damn it, I should have come up with this idea.
right.
Super
Right.
unique. That's my favorite character.
She's a small minority tribe from Earth twice, who is also part jellyfish, part spaceship. She is magical on multiple levels, right? And yet it's all for the service of, hey, is this a good school? What's going on here?
I was worried you were going to ask me that question.
We're kind of left in a point of saying, what's going on here?
Right. And I'll say there's a few more pages after this, but essentially, Binti goes back to the university and gets ready to resume her studies there. They discover that she's even weirder than we've imagined that she was.
Yeah, it feels very unsatisfying in the moment, but I have to feel like that was the intention. But Mets, I have to feel like that this is on purpose. It feels intentional to have a shaggy dog style ending, or at least an unsatisfactory ending where everything leads up to kind of a joke. And so I'm left in a place wondering, like, what was the intention behind this? What is the purpose to this? And I don't know for sure, but one place I find myself speculating on is if this is a way for Okorafor to really put a punctuation onto that feeling of a disparate identity.
Mm-hmm.
Binti is never resolved in who she is, and that's all right. She is left kind of still dealing with all these complexities and shades of all the various things she has become over the course of the story. And wondering, is that a way that this Afrofuturism perspective is manifesting? Someone writing from this perspective might be voicing their ideas of the feelings of identity.
I think that certainly could be in there. I don't want to speak for Okorafor directly because, frankly, I don't think I'm equipped to do that. But one thing I take away from that is if the Adan isn't the solution to everything, right? If it's not the way Binti resolves all of her problems, it tells us that the character was focused on a goal that she didn't realize she shouldn't have been through the whole story.
Mm.
Now, that's not to say she didn't get anything useful out of studying and coming to understand the Adan, because she did arrive at a much stronger understanding of herself and who she is. Even though it's not resolved, she's now aware of so many connections she didn't have before.
Right.
And she has access to so much more information and cultural knowledge, and frankly, a fusion of all that cultural knowledge that was not there in the first place. So she's able to see what we might call the intersectionality of all the different racial and species-based and socioeconomic and other conditions that are thrust upon her by virtue of who she is, and also that she may voluntarily identify with by maintaining traditions such as continuing to cover her hair with a jitsa, even though nobody at Umza University has ever seen the stuff before.
Right.
We see a character who's trying to live in, frankly, a hugely complicated world, a world that is so complicated that it, on a surface read, it may seem like, oh gosh, this has gone way off the rails by the end of the third novella. In reality, what's happening here is Binti's life is really, really crazy, but our lives aren't necessarily all that much more normal. It's just that all of the different layers that make us up as individuals don't involve spaceships and other species.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and I think in addition to all of that, which all feels correct for sure, there's also the aspect of wouldn't it be cool? Wouldn't it be cool if you were part spaceship? Wouldn't it be cool if you were able to broker the peace between these two wildly different kind of alien species, but also become part of both of them? I think that there's a sense of play that's going on in this book as well too. Or just say, let's conceive of a crazy science fiction universe in some fun ways that it might articulate. And one of those ways is you'll get to be part spaceship sometimes.
And this is also making sure to center the experience of a character from a culture where this doesn't normally happen. The mere fact that Binti has the origin that she has, and yet experiences this wild, over-the-top science fiction story, is in and of itself an opportunity for us to consider the idea of identity.
Yep.
Because we might not be having these kind of conversations about this novella if it wasn't for Binti's Himba status, if it wasn't for Binti's relationship with the Kush, or her relationship with the Cosmopolitan Society of Umza University, and her specific placement and identity relative to all of that. It's very important that it's not just some kid from Atlanta, Georgia who scored high on their tests, right? It would be a very different novel if that character was the one that went to the stars and brokered a peace between two different ethnic groups.
Yeah, for sure.
And through all of this, too, another thing that anchors Binti as the person that she is her trauma and her violence. And that's not necessarily always a good anchor, right? She experiences bouts and flashes of anger that she has trouble controlling throughout the entire series over this. And I lost count of the number of times she referenced that moment of attack where she realized everyone around her was starting to die.
Mm-hmm.
But that is also a part of her that she has to learn to live with, whether or not it's a comfortable state of living or whether or not it's fully resolved by the end of things, because that trauma is going to continue to be with her, and managing it is going to have to be part of her life, no matter what.
Yeah.
Again, this is another spot where the specific identity of who this character is really informs everything about how she interacts with the world. And finally, I think that you can look at not only the resolution of the Adan, but also of all of these various transformations that Binti goes through over the course of the novellas as a reflection on the inevitability of learning, right? That at some point you are going to have to confront and discover more about yourself than you thought you would, and that it is a natural process of human growth that we become more introspective and begin to understand parts of ourselves that we didn't know about
Yeah.
in previous parts of our lives, right?
Right.
For people who don't exist in science fiction worlds, this can be as simple as realizing, wow, I have a pattern of behaving with somebody that I don't want to continue. I need to find a better way to interact with this person so that I can get along with them better and work with them, right? That is a natural part of human growth and also a difficult part of human growth for anyone to experience. It's just laid out at 1,000 times magnification here because it happens to involve a giant jellyfish.
Yeah, right. Another way we might understand the ending too is one that doesn't necessarily read it as a joke or as a Shaggy Dog ending or a anticlimax, but one where we say this question that the Saturn aliens ask, where they say, we need someone who is like us, who can speak from a perspective that resonates with us. Can you give us a recommendation? Does have a degree of profundity to it. Essentially, they're saying we are something so alien that even other aliens don't recognize us. They're metaphysical beings on some level. And they say we specifically need someone who has gone through transformations, who continues to grow and change and become new things as it goes. That's what we're like. And we need you to say there is a place for us. What do you think of the university? Because you yourself said when the Meduse joined the university, it is kind of a recognition of like joining the galactic community, the enlightened galactic community. And so this alien race that wants to become a part of this, though, needs a vouchsafe to know that they are not going to be treated unfairly or like they aren't people. And that's why they do need this recommendation from someone who can speak from that unique perspective.
What you're talking about there, there's a fundamental paradox, right? We need someone like us to give this recommendation. There's no possible way that Binti is like them in a literal sense. Right?
Yeah.
She is a human being combined with the DNA of two other alien species and having some sort of blood relation to at least two different major tribes from her home. What they are asking for is not someone who is like us in that we are identical, but is like us in that we can have a spiritual or emotional connection and an understanding between each other because of the empathy that we have built out of experiences that we don't necessarily share. But are similar to one another.
Right.
We want the opinion of somebody who has taken enough time to explore themselves that they can start to understand what someone else might feel like.
And so even though it doesn't touch on any of the immediate concerns of the plot, the war, Binti's transformation specifically, or her position and identity, I think it does still have an importance that could justify the fact that it is the climax of the book and everything, all the moving pieces, which include the war and the Meduse and the genetic transformations and the dawn and the magic and the math and everything, all kind of lead to this point, which boils down to, is it a good school? Still has a reason for it being at that spearhead, right?
Right. And even the question right there at the end, is it a good school? We don't really hear that much bad about UMSA. Everybody seems to like it and respect it. That an institution that hollowed by so many different species can still be a suspicious place for some group, or a place that not every species might feel immediately interested in, reminds us that there's a perspective outside UMSA University, one that we might need to consider as a minority opinion in the universe. And might have a very complex and detailed world of its own, as the Idan suggests, but does not want to or does not feel safe interacting with what the majority of the universe has decided is the way to do something.
Right. Because in the moment of the scene, absolutely, It seems like an absurd question. Is this a good school? Because everything in the story so far has said not only is it a good school, it is the best place to be. It is the absolute center of technological development, intellectual learning, cultural sophistication, and everything, right? So it seems like an absurd question. How is Uzo University? Of course, it's great. But that is ignoring the possibility that just because most people see it as great, there isn't something else going on that could mean for some people there's a problem that needs to be addressed.
And Binti herself has experienced the negatives of Umza University. Certainly, the fact that she can't live through her trauma effectively there, that cultures have different ways of behaving there, and that she has to modify her own behavior in order to coexist with other people. And the fact that she's faced discrimination or people who look down upon her, even at what is ostensibly the most enlightened place in the universe, right?
Mhm.
So, in that sense, when they are asking her, is it a good school? They're asking for her personal lived experience that could be different than whatever the literature Umza University might send to this alien race to say, come visit with us, check it out, right?
Yeah. But at the same time, too, Mets, it definitely feels like at the end of the book, it is a piece of literature. Like this whole story is all leading up to someone saying, yeah, Umza University is great. And then the video ends and says, okay, parents, time to start the tour.
Certainly, Binti's decision to return to Umza tells us that it's a place that she wants to be and that she believes in. And that's important because after all of the identities that she's been exposed to and all of the experience she's had, which I would argue is frankly more than the average university education in my world, she still feels like there's value in learning and participating in this multicultural, multi-species experience that is on some level uncomfortable for her.
They should have called this book The Fault in Their Stars.
I guess that's better than The Fault in Their Tentacles. Anyway, I think it is possible and not necessarily appropriate to dismiss this book because it goes so far away from where it started by the end of the third novella. But I think you're right to stop and question that and say, this person knows how to write a story and they are doing this for a reason. Maybe this isn't the spot where I, as the reader, would have taken the story to its conclusion, but the author did. And it is worth stopping to investigate why, because she certainly did that for her own reasons.
Yeah, and to be clear, I quite enjoyed that ending. I thought it was great. It kind of ends on a Shaggy Dog note or almost a humorous moment. And largely that comes from two. The story had kind of lost me up to that point. Once she started getting involved with yet another tribe that had yet another magical technology, I was kind of losing my interest a bit. I thought the first novella was very good. And then it was kind of stretching the idea a little too thin, you know what I mean? Until it whipped back around in a super weird and interesting place at the end of the story. So I actually thought it ended on a higher note than the one it was going in on, for sure. I'm very glad I went through all three novellas. And again, if nothing else, to hear a different voice and see things from a different perspective and recognize the breadth that this genre really does have.
And I think that's interesting because I had a slightly different reaction. I actually found Binti Home to be my favorite of the three novellas. The first one to me was relatively straightforward and didn't have any surprises in it, but I enjoyed the conflict and complication that came with Binti not only doing something that was probably very difficult for her, which is returning to the home she abandoned, but also forcing herself to interact not only with her own immediate family, but with the family she didn't even know she had, to try and understand more of who she was. I felt like that was a very brave action and one that led to a lot more development than I would have expected in that second novella. When we got to the third one, I did feel like the story moved a lot faster and tried to explore a lot of things with maybe not as much time as I would have liked for all of it. But what I did like and took away from that was that despite all of the insanity of the experiences that Binti had by the end, she was willing to go back to the university and find herself and restart where she wanted to restart and find a path for herself out of all of this. Yeah. And I think that message, that despite everything that she had been through, she was willing to continue the search for herself and what was important to her, to be very powerful. And on that note, I think it's time for us to get back to a lot more realistic science fiction with my favorite talking bird.
I wonder what Silk has been up to this whole time.
You don't have to wonder. He's been trying to decide how many tomatoes he has to buy Matera Rose.
Of course.
We'll get back to the Book of the Long Sun with Book 2, Lake of the Long Sun, next episode. Thank you all very much for listening. This has been Alzabo Soup. I'm Metz.
I'm Phil.
And Phil, which alien species would you most like to have inject their DNA into you?
I want to have the DNA of those little burger-flipping robots from Batteries Not Included.
That's really good. I was just going to say Tilda Swinton. Alzabo Soup is Philip Armstrong and Andrew Metzroth. Today's podcast featured Binti Home, and Binti the Night Masquerade, all from Binti the Complete Trilogy by Nnedi Okorafor, published in 2019 by DAW Books.
Audio editing and original music by Andrew Metzroth. Logo and graphic design by Philip Armstrong. Join our community to learn about updates, appearances, additional content, and to help us find more brains to eat. You can reach us at alzabosoup@gmail.com, find us on Facebook, or send us a tweet at alzabosoup.
Alzabo Soup is a production of Unreliable Source Media. This podcast, copyright 2021, Philip Armstrong and Andrew Metzroth. Thanks for dining with us. We'll be back as soon as we can find some more hot sauce.